All right, hello again. So in this video, we're going to go over CSS Grid, more about CSS Grid. This is probably, I have a 2 on here. You may be seeing this as the second video in a series of 42 videos. No, I'm kidding. Sort of. But hopefully you know some things about CSS Grid already because we're going to go through some of the more advanced sort of technical stuff about it. So, but I'll review a little bit as we go along. But we're going to talk about, in this video, we're going to talk about this stuff. We're going to talk about grid line names and numbers, the repeat function, which is kind of cool, making grids responsive without using media queries, which is very cool, and then a little bonus of spanning grid lines. You might not see it as a bonus, but I am going to call it a bonus. So I probably gave you this file, if I'm a good person again. So you can edit this file and start with that, so you don't have to type all this, obviously. So let's go ahead and get started. So just to review real quick, hopefully you've seen this before, but this is the CSS Grid layout guide from CSS Tricks. And I wanted to look at grid numbers and lines and tracks and things. So remember that a cell, this is CSS Grid, right? If this, in that case, this is a cell right here. These are grid lines. Those are the lines between the tracks. These are tracks, and they can be rows or columns. So you have lines, cells, rows, and columns, right? So you can, so some of this video, we're gonna be talking about grid lines and how do you specify where you want something to go. So you can use grid lines for that and also names. So automatically grid lines are created when you create a grid, like it numbers from left to right, unless you change that, but I think it's almost always left to right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? So there's 6 lines here, which makes 5 columns, if my math is correct, right? So you can go forward. You can also go backward, which is kind of interesting. So -1, -2, -3. So if you go the other direction, it is negative numbers. So a cool thing about that is -1 is always the last line. So if you want something to end on the last grid line, you could say -1. It also counts a cross axis. So this is the main axis. This is the cross axis. I may have that backwards, but I think I'm right on that. So you got 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then -1, -2, -3, and -4. So you can use those numbers, those line numbers, which we will see in a second. You can also name your rows. So row start, row end, third line, last line. You can call them almost whatever you want. Here, this one's called first, line 2, line 3, call for, start. So you can kind of make up your own names there. Names are kind of cool because they make more sense than numbers sometimes. And if you start adding things in, they will still have that name, if that makes sense. So say you add some more rows and columns, end is always going to be on the end, for example. It's not going to be like, it started out being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's not going to be 8. So hopefully that makes sense. But sometimes naming is a little more convenient, although it does take a little bit more work because the numbers are automatic. Okay, that probably didn't make much sense, but it will when we do this little demo. Okay, so reviewing some things. So we just did rows and columns, right? So your grid uses rows and columns. You can set that up with grid template rows and grid template columns and grid template rows. You have grid lines, which divide the grid into rows and columns, actually. You have grid tracks, which are the rows and columns. And then we're going to use a shorthand, which you'll see in a minute. It'll make sense when we start using it. Grid column. So when we start saying where something ends and starts, you could say grid column start and grid column end, but you can also use this shorthand. So grid column 1/3 is the same as grid column start 1 and grid column end 3. So like other CSS shorthands, this one's kind of confusing. But you'll see as you use it, it just saves you a line of CSS. Other than that, it's not that big a deal. You'll see it. It'll make more sense when we do it here in a second. Like I said, on the grid lines, they number across and then also vertically. So vertically and horizontal. And then if you want to go the right to left, it's negative numbers. Line names, you'll see how to do that, but you put them in square brackets to do that. To name a line, you put it in square brackets. And you'll see that. And they can be more meaningful names, right? Like instead of like line 7, which what does that mean? You could say end of the main or whatever you want to call it. So it's a little more descriptive, a little more semantic that way. So the benefits of side names, like named lines we said, is sidebar start versus line 2, that kind of thing. Might be a little easier to update layouts if you use names. And you can have multiple names per line if you want to go really crazy, but then you're going to start confusing yourself. Maybe. Like the other video that you hopefully saw, there's a bunch of example code in here commented out in this right sidebar. So take a look at that. I'm not going to read it all to you, but there's lots of different examples in there. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take all that information that I just ran through super quickly and make this into a little layout with a header, a sidebar, a main content in the middle, and then an aside on the right. And we're going to use named lines for that. So this is one of the, sometimes I will paste code in instead of typing it because I don't want you guys to sit there and wait for me to type and make a mistake and then I'll have to go back and blah, blah, blah. So what you want to do is go down to where it says demo named lines. That's the one we're on here. And it says edit this. That's a little clue for you. I tried to put in comment tags where you guys needed to edit stuff. But we want to turn this into a grid first, obviously, because we're using display grid. So I'll type that one because I can type that. I'm going to say display grid. And what happens? Not really anything because we haven't given it any columns yet, right? So right now it got a little bigger, but that's about it. So it's still stacking vertically. All right, so now I'm gonna paste this in and I'll explain it. And you can pause if you want and read it. It doesn't fit very well, that's the other issue. I'm gonna do this so you guys can see a little better. And then before I explain it, I'm gonna put in the gap. Gap is the space between the cells, right? I think you probably saw that in another video, but that's what it is if you never saw that before. Okay, so what does this mean? So we say grid template columns. Normally what we've seen before is I would say grid template columns 100 pixels, 1 FR, and 100 pixels. That means I have 3 columns. The first one is 100 pixels wide, the second one is whatever's left over of the full width, and then the third one is 100 pixels. Grid template rows, 61 FR means there's 2 rows, one is 60 high, and one track, right, is 60 high, and one is whatever's left over. So that's kind of normal, but then we've got this stuff in the square brackets. So it's easier for me, and maybe for you to understand if you say like, it's gonna be line, track, line, track, line, track, line, right? Because there's always going to be a line on the beginning and the end, and there's going to be tracks in between the lines. That's how the grid works, right? So remember, it's line, track, line, track, line, track. So what does that mean? That means the first line is sidebar start. The second one is sidebar end and main start. So you can have 2 names. You just have to put a space between them. The names, again, go in these square brackets, which are below your curly braces, which are these, on your keyboard, so they should be pretty easy to find. And then so we have a sidebar start line, we have a 100 pixel track, we have sidebar end, main start, which is the same line, then we've got a 1 FR track, and then we've got main end, which is a line, then we've got another track, that's 100 pixels, and then we have the end. Line. Same thing on the rows. This is line, track, line, track, line, track. So feel free to pause and go ahead and type that so that you will have it in your file, right? And then we'll go on and start putting things where they go. So I'm going to resize this because you can't see the page anymore. So right now it's made that. If I inspect this, I'm wondering if it's going to be all messed up if I inspect this way. No, probably not. So yeah, there's the code. I'll uncover that in a second. You have to pause it and type it, right? But here you can see I have turned on, I inspected the page, right? And then I clicked on the little grid button. Remember that from the previous video. And then I can see the line numbers. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then that's the horizontal, and then there's 1, it's kind of can't see it. It's 1, 2, 3 vertically. But you can also go into the the dev tools here, and you can say show line numbers. Yes, I did show the line numbers, but I can also show line names. So now I'm showing the line names, and you can see since we named them, they are showing up in there. There's sidebar start, sidebar end, main start. Here's header start, header end, content start. These are the vertical lines, and these are the horizontal lines. So you can show those. Here's main end down there on the right, and then there's end on the very right. So you can show those in the dev tools, and that will help you see like what is going on here. So right now we have 4 containers, 4 grid items, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So they automatically went into the first 4 cells. How many cells do we have? We have 6, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I can still count. So now we're gonna say where do we want this stuff to go, because by default it's just gonna go every, it's gonna fill up every cell, 1 item to a cell. But we can say where we want things to go. That's the whole idea, right? Sorry, I had to pause there for a second. I had a computer issue that I had to fix. I love that. So we have the header. This is the header. You can't see all the words. That's why I was a little bit thrown off there, but you'll see it in a second. So you look for the line that says demo named lines. That's this whole thing. And then header is the header here. So we're going to edit that. And we're going to tell the browser where we're going to put those lines. So I'm going to say grid column. And remember that's short for grid column start and grid column end. So we're going to say grid column, and we're going to say sidebar dash start, and then a slash, and then end. So what did we do? We told that we wanted the header, which is this red part, right? It says header. We want it to start at sidebar start. There's sidebar start. And we want it to end at end, which is there. So we just told it to basically go across those 3 cells. Awesome, right? So you're basically saying like, go across here and there. Now we need to tell it where we want it to, how high we want it to be, how many rows we want it to be. So we're going to say grid rows, and it's already kind of doing it, but we're going to do it anyway. I'm going to say grid row header start, and then a slash, and then header end. And you don't have to call these names that. You can make up your own names, but it makes sense to use names that make sense, right? So it didn't really move, but we just specified, hey, you're starting here at header start, and you're ending here at header end, right? So that's it. That's it for that one. That's good. So let's go down to the next one. We're gonna work with the sidebar, and again, it's already there, but we're gonna pretend that we're gonna be good people and put all the code in there for that. But it's automatically going to the 3 leftover cells, but I wanted to show you how you can specify that. So we're going to say on demo named line sidebar, which is this guy, the orange one, we're going to say grid column. And we're going to say sidebar start. Sidebar dash start. That's the start of it. And I think you should put a space in here, but I should check if you have to have a space or if you can just do that. I think you have to have a space, or you would want it to put a space. I'm putting a space. And then I'm going to say end. So now we're specifying that it's starting in the sidebar start, and it is, oh, it's not supposed to be end, sorry. It is supposed to be sidebar end. See it? Now it spans all the way to the end, which is not right. Sidebar end, there we go. Back to the correctness. All right, so that's good. So it starts there and ends there. And then we're going to do grid row again. And the row on this one is content start, content end. So content, sorry, there's some typing involved here. Slash content dash end. All right, so that's the sidebar is good. Now, should we save a little time and copy and paste? I think that's going to cause us more trouble than it's worth. Sometimes copying and pasting is good. Sometimes you end up copying and pasting and then you copy and paste a mistake, or you don't change something that should be changed, you know, that's living dangerously. But so we'll just type it for this rest of this one. So we're going down to demo named lines main, which is the green one. So we're going to say grid column again. And this one is main start and main end. So main dash start and main dash end. Okay. And then we're going to say grid row. And this one is content start and content, content start and content end. That is correct. Content start. Slash content end. All right, so it's back to the way it was, but we're basically saying start here and end there. I think that's good on that one. The last one is the aside, which is this one. So you can probably figure this one out. Maybe you're starting to figure it out, but let's copy and paste. Let's just do it. Let's live dangerously. So if I copy and paste these two lines, grid column, main start, main end, grid row, content start, content end, what's going to happen? They're on top of each other because we said start on the same line and end on the same line and column on both directions, right? So that is not correct, obviously. So grid column, the aside should start over here at main end. So we're going to say main end, and it ends at actual end, which is the last line down here, right? So there's end right there. So it starts here, ends there. So that should be end. And then the row is correct. So it's content start because it's the same rows as the other ones. Oops, I spelled main end. That's why that's broken. There we go. So main end and then end is right for the columns. The rows are the same because it's the same as all three of these are the same. They're all content start, content end. Did you notice that? Maybe not. All right, so that's the end of that. So look at that. We made a little layout, right? We've got a header, we've got a sidebar there, we've got a stretchy main column there, and then we've got another fixed sidebar there. So there's a little bit of kind of a responsive design. You could put a footer in there too. It'd be the same as the header. And there you go. And it's fairly easy to do, and you have a lot of flexibility on how you can do this. So that's what we're going to continue on with. All right. So the next subject is the repeat function. So the repeat function is really cool. It is a way to save typing a little bit, but also if you have a pattern that you want to repeat, it lets you do that pretty quickly. So let's repeat a pattern. Oh, I'm seeing the lines here. Let me refresh here. There we go. Okay, I'll inspect it again. So it looks like this. Let me zoom in a little bit. So you can say, instead of saying grid template columns 100, 100, 100, 100, you could say repeat 4, 100 pixels. It's the same thing. That gives you 4 columns, 100 pixels each. If I said repeat 3, 1FR, it would give me 3 equal flexible columns. It's the same as saying grid template columns 1FR, 1FR, 1FR. And you're thinking like, well, it's not that useful. It actually is kind of useful once you get used to it. You can also repeat patterns. So if you said grid pattern, or you said repeat 2, 100 space 200, it would go 100, 200, 100, 200 because it would repeat that pattern. And then autofit and autofill can use to do responsive repeating, which we'll see a little later. So I'm not going to get into that one yet. But this is cool. So we're going to go down here. We're going to make this into a repeating function. And the other part about repeats is it will continue on as many cells as you have. So if you have 100 cells, you can have it repeat as many times as you want and not type out 100 things, if you think about it that way. All right. So we're going to go down to, and the line numbers probably won't be right, but it's around 195. It says demo repeat. That's the one we're looking for. And we're going to say, and I already put the gap in there because I think you guys know what that is, but I didn't put display gap in here or display grid yet. So I'm going to say display grid. So now it's a grid. So it was, now it's just stacking up because we didn't give it any columns yet, right? So now we're going to give it some columns. We're going to say grid template columns. And we're going to say repeat. And you hit, if you type RE, it'll say like, oh, you want to type repeat, and then it'll put the repeat in there. And then it will put your cursor between the parentheses, which is where you put your kind of repeating function. So we want 4 columns, comma, and we want them to be 1 FR. Remember, that means just a fraction. FR is fraction. So it makes 4 columns that are 1 FR wide. So that makes them, 1 FR is a responsive kind of unit. So see how it's kind of responsive. I just made like 4 little boxes with a couple of lines of code, right? So you can use that for cards, you can use it for just repeating columns, whatever you want. Yeah, pretty good. So in the next, we're gonna make the rows too, and we're gonna add in a little bit of grid auto rows. So this means because grid auto rows, because this is going to make as a certain number of columns sometimes. Well, we're just saying we want the rows to be the rows that are created automatically. We want them to be 60 pixels high. I was trying to explain that in a better way, but I didn't. Sorry about that. So now it says the rows that are created by the browser are going to be 60 pixels high. So that's what the auto part means. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense. That's it on this one. Look at that. That was easy. Let's go down to where it says demo repeat pattern. So what if we wanted to do a pattern? So go down where it says demo repeat pattern, turn it into a CSS grid. How do we do that? Display grid. So now it's stacking, right? It was side by side. We want to repeat this 100, 200, 100, 200 pattern. So we're going to say grid template columns, repeat, and we're going to say 2 times, and then a comma, and then 100 pixels, and then 200 pixels. I think I typed that correctly. And the gap I already put in there for you. So look at that. It's doing a 100 pixel wide, and then a 200, and a 100, and then a 200. Right? So it just saves me some typing, but also you can repeat that pattern so that you don't like type something wrong or whatever. So if I did 3, now there's 3, even though you can't see it because there's no content for it. Put it back to 2. All right, I think that's fairly explanatory, self-explanatory. Maybe not. You make the call. So next we're going to do demo responsive. So here's where it gets a little bit interesting. Let's put it that way. So wherever it says .demo responsive, that's the one down here. We're going to do that one. So this is going to be some cards that are responsive. I should go back and talk about what we're going to use on this one. So this one we're going to use some of these sizing systems. So there's auto fit, auto fill, and min max. What are those? The one we're going to use is called min max. It sets a minimum and a maximum size for flexibility. So what does that mean? That means in use, it will become bigger until it maxes out at the max size. But when it gets to the min size, it will start to wrap, which is pretty cool. So it's a really cool way to do like rows of cards or a gallery or something that you want to repeat, but you don't want it to get too big or too small. So here's a formula that says, here's just an example. It says repeat auto fit. Auto fit means collapses empty cells and stretches items to fill. What does that mean? You'll see it in action here in a second. But what this means is how they're going to be spread out is auto fit. And the min max, this is the size. So think of min max as the minimum size and the maximum size, right? So the minimum size is 200 and the maximum size is 1 FR. So it won't get smaller than 200, but it won't get bigger than 1 FR. 1 FR means all the way across. So like it says, these creates columns that are at least 200 pixels wide and it wraps when needed. That's the auto fit part. and then it fills the available space. Yeah. So a tip here, use autofit for card layouts where you want items to grow. If you want to make them all the same size, use autofill. So sometimes you got to just try these out, but the min-max is pretty useful. So now that we explained that a little bit, so we're going to take this and turn this into a row of cards that are responsive. Okay, so we've got demo responsive in there. We're going to say display grid because we have to do that every time because I didn't type it in there for you guys. Maybe I'll start doing that. So now it's a grid. I already have the gap in there. That's why there's that gap in there. So we have display grid. Now we're going to say, this is kind of a complicated one, so bear with me as I type this. I'm going to say grid template columns. And I'm going to do the repeat function. And I'm going to say auto fit. And then a comma. And then min max. Thankfully, VS Code puts a lot of this in here for me. And then more parentheses. And then I'm going to say 150 pixels, comma 1 FR. FR, not R. And then I'm going to put my semicolon at the end. Don't forget that. Oops, semicolon. Boom. It worked. Let me spread this out just for a second so you can see it. So this means I want this pattern to repeat. I want to make autofit means make as many as you can. So we're not saying an actual size here. That's what makes them responsive, right? They resize to fit whatever fits, auto fit. And then the size is going to be min max. The minimum is 150. The maximum is 1 FR. So what do we get? Here's what we get. We get these cards. Hopefully you guys saw that. Yeah, you might have to pause to type that. But here we got these cards. So now there's one row. Now there's 2 rows. As soon as we get down to 150 pixels, it's going to start making them on the next row. And then when we get too small, now we got 3 rows. And then if I look at this in mobile, let's see if it works. I say that, but it probably won't work. Now it's in mobile, it's 1, right? So it's in mobile view now. I'll turn that off. It goes from 1 column to 2 columns to 3 columns. It's moving up and down to 4 columns to 5 columns to 6 columns. So that is pretty responsive, like little card layout, right? Because whatever's going to fit, that's how many columns we're supposed to get. And then, but they have to be within these sizes, 150 to 1 FR. 1 FR means all the way across, basically. So I know that's a little complicated, but this is a very common and useful pattern, is use the repeat to make as many boxes as necessary. That's what autofit and autofill do. And then you want to make them, you know, a certain size. If I change this to 200, now the minimum size is 200. So now they're bigger, right? So it's gonna take more space to get them to go to new lines. I'm gonna put that back to 150. I don't want to mess things up. All right, so that is the responsive grid. I think that is it on that one. Yeah, pretty cool. And that's a very useful one. The last one, the bonus one I was talking about, we kind of did, you know, we use line names and line numbers already, but this one is about if you want to span something. So spanning is just another way to say, instead of using the number, you could say span 2 columns, span 3 columns, span 4 columns, whatever. So we have this crazy layout here. And right now we are using line numbers. So if I inspect this, I wanted to show you guys how you could see the line numbers again. Sorry, I got to put this on top for a second. I'm going to hit the grid. Is this it? Oh, that's the wrong one. Ugh, sorry. Should have quit while I was ahead here. It's this grid. There we go. So I turned on that grid. How many rows and columns do we have? We have 3 rows and 4 columns, right? Which means we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines this way and 1, 2, 3, 4 lines this way. So you could specify, what I'm trying to get at, is you could specify, hey, I want this one to start on line 1 and end on 3. I want this to start on line 3 and end on 5. That is fine. But you can also use span. So if this is going from, you can see this says spans 2 columns right there. If it's going to span 2 columns, I could say start on line 1 and end on 3. Or instead of that, I can say, and I put this one in for you guys, I could say grid column 1 / span 2. So I'm going to say grid column 1 span 2. And I get the same result. I'm telling it to span 2 columns, which means span means go across, right? So that works, right? So instead of me having to figure out which line number it is, I just say, oh, I wanted to go across 2 columns. Same thing on the second one. It spanned 2 on the second line. So this is 1 to 3. So that is the same thing. I'm going to say span 2. So it's not really changing anything because we're just doing the same thing, but we're doing it a different way. And then on the third one, you can see it up here. I put the code in there already, but we'll put it in because we'll be good. This is going to be span 2 as well. And it's not always span 2. I'm just happened to be, I did all 2s for some reason. And then the last one, we could just leave it the way it is. Yeah, number 4, sorry. We're going to do span 2 on number 4. So this goes from line 2 to line 4, so that's span 2. It's just another way to do it. That's why I called it a bonus. You're like, why do I care? You probably don't. But that was fun though, right? I can hear all you guys saying it's fun. So what do? We named some grid lines for semantic and maintainable. I gotta turn this off. There we go. We named some grid lines for more semantic markup, right? So if you have a grid line, it makes more sense than a number, right? You can use the repeat function to simplify repeating patterns. You can make responsive grids with autofit, autofill. It's autofit or autofill. And there's other ones too, but we just use those or used autofit and min-max. And then you can span items using the span keyword, which is just what we did on that last one. All right. That was fun. Hope you guys had fun too. I think that's it for this one. Just some more CSS Grid stuff. And you will see some more probably. But hopefully that was helpful, and I'll talk to you again later.